Well, it's the book many people are talking about, and it paints a devastating picture of President Donald Trump. Mary Trump is the president's niece. She is the first member of the Trump family to go public. Her best-selling book, entitled Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. Mary Trump, who is a trained psychologist, says her uncle is deeply damaged psychologically by his father, Fred. The book is based on firsthand memories and conversations and family documents, and it paints an unflattering story of a toxic family and a president described as a narcissistic egomaniac. We are very happy to have Mary Trump herself joining us today from New York City. Mary, thank you for taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. I've gone through the book. You cover a lot of ground. There's a lot of astonishing things in there. What's the most important thing, Mary, you want people to know about your uncle?
That he's unfit for the office he holds. One of my main goals in writing the book was to help people understand how long-standing and deeply ingrained his psychological issues are, and help them gain access to information that they may not have had 4 years ago when it comes time to vote again on November 3rd, 2020.
And, I'm curious as well about the timing of all this. You've come under fire for this book coming out now, but clearly for you, it felt like the right time to tell this story to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was also serendipity. One has very little control sometimes over when a book actually gets published. And, it could have been published a few months ago if certain other things hadn't happened. So it just turns out that it was the right time. And I'm really gratified that it seems to be landing as well as it has.
You have said that your grandfather, Fred Trump Sr., was a sociopath. And I know part one of this book, Mary, is called The Cruelty is the Point. There's a lot of stuff in there that is really quite something to read and go through, and a lot of anecdotes. Tell me how you think your grandfather, that sort of cruelty, how it shaped Donald Trump.
It shaped him in a couple of particularly salient ways. First of all, when Donald was quite young, about 2.5, my grandmother, his mother, was very ill, and to all intents and purposes was not available to him as a caregiver for about a year. My grandfather was neither interested in nor capable of taking her place. So for that very crucial developmental period, Donald was essentially abandoned, at least symbolically. And I think that created in him all sorts of insecurities and forced him to develop some pretty severe defense mechanisms in order to survive that sense of abandonment. The second thing that's important to remember is that my dad, his older brother and the oldest Trump son, was about 7.5 years older. So in a weird way, Donald had the benefit of watching my dad suffer at the hands of their father. My dad was the namesake, the heir apparent, and never met his father's exacting standards, partially because he just wasn't the killer that my grandfather required him to be to take over the business. So Donald watched his brother be systematically humiliated and dismantled at the hands of their father, and learned very early on and over a quite long period of time that in order to survive in my family, you couldn't be kind, you couldn't admit a mistake, you could never be wrong. All of those things were considered weakness in the Trump family.
And so that's why when you look at your uncle now and his career in business and his career on television, now his career in politics, from that point of view, it sort of makes sense, as twisted as it is.
Absolutely. And I think, there are several through lines that I try to illustrate in the book, and that's definitely one of them. As I say, he is very much today as he was at 3, and that's a problem.
I know that some people have said that, your uncle can be actually quite charming in person. I wonder, with your experience with him, is that true?
Yes, it's absolutely true. And in fact, I think that's a large part of why he's been able to get away with so much, because he does, in that moment, one on one, make the other person feel seen or at least special. And, you know, um, I think that is a large part of how people who have a very superficial relationship with him are able to credit him with things that actually aren't true about him.
We cover a lot of what's going on in your country as it relates to COVID-19. So let me ask you, Mary, if I can. The president is struggling to manage this crisis, to put it mildly. Just a few days ago, again, he said the virus will just go away or will disappear. Doesn't seem to accept advice from medical experts. Is that typical for your uncle?
Yeah, he's incapable of accepting advice that contradicts his own narrative. And I think from very early on, in like even before this should have been a crisis, he made a decision about what he thought was more important. And at the time, it was protecting the stock market from any scares it may have experienced as a result of announcing the virus. And because he's mishandled it from the beginning, he's incapable of course correcting, because that would mean he'd have to admit he was wrong, which again is admitting weakness. And he cannot do that under any circumstances.
I want to ask you about the subtitle, too, Mary, of your book, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. How dangerous do you think he is?
Well, he is constitutionally unfit to wield the power that comes with the office he holds. And he has the nuclear codes, and he also is driving the response of many governors in our country to this plague, essentially, we're living through. And we see on a state by state basis the difference between the handling of this by certain governors, and it's it's a disaster because there are still people out there who politically think it's to their advantage to align themselves with him, and they dare not cross him. So if he says, don't wear a mask, you shouldn't have to wear a mask, you shouldn't have to social distance, you should go back to school, that's what these governors are going to push for. And more people are going to get sick, and more people are going to die. And we're in a very dangerous place in our country and in the context of this disease that's ravaging us.
The president himself, since this book has come out, has called you scarred and nasty and vicious. You've heard it. You also have no doubt or seen his tweets in the last couple of days where he said this: next up is Mary Trump, a seldom seen niece who knows little about me, saying untruthful things about my wonderful parents who couldn't stand her and me and violated her non-disclosure agreement. She also broke the law by giving out my tax returns. She's a mess! Exclamation point. I want to get your response to that, Mary.
Well, it's very little of it is true, which is something else we've come to expect from Donald. Starting with the more concrete stuff, I've never had his tax returns. I'm his niece. There was no reason for me to have them, so I couldn't possibly have released them since they were never in my possession. The other documents he speaks of belong to me, and I obtained them through a process during the lawsuit that we were engaged in 20 years ago. And those were all my grandfather's financial records. As for my grandparents and their feelings towards me, I can't speak to my grandfather. I don't believe he really cared about anybody outside of Donald, but I was very close with my grandmother. So I don't believe she would have said that about me. And if I have been a seldom seen niece, I would also probably lay that at the feet of my aunts and uncles, who did very little to, include me after my dad died. So again, I think that says more about Donald than it does about me.
You may know that the president is quite unpopular with Canadians, according to the polls, Mary. And we're watching closely to see what happens really in just over 100 days from today during the election. Your uncle, of course, is hoping he will be reelected. If he loses, based on what you know, do you think he will actually accept the results?
I think it depends greatly on the outcome of the election. if he loses resoundingly, then he will do his best to spin it somehow and exit stage right. If it's close, then we have a different scenario on our hands. It also depends a lot on how the people around him recommend that he handle it. So I think the best way to avoid an outcome we'll all regret is to make sure that Joe Biden wins in a landslide.
I'm also curious what it was like for you personally, Mary, to write a book like this. What was the process like? How difficult, how challenging was it?
It was extremely difficult at times. I was grappling with things from my past and from my dad's childhood that I'd, tried not to think about, honestly, in the last few decades. And just sort of revisiting how horribly he was treated in the family without deserving it in any way, shape, or form. That was the hardest part for me. Just having to relive what had happened to my dad.
And I know you've done a whole lot of interviews as this book has come out. Were you prepared, though, for the attacks and frankly, the hate that's come your way in the past couple of weeks?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I assumed that was a given. I've been much more surprised, honestly, by the positive responses. It's been extraordinarily gratifying. I'm not worried about the other stuff. It's irrelevant to me.
Do you think there's any redemption for your uncle, or in your mind, Mary, is Donald Trump a lost cause?
Yeah, I don't think there's redemption, but I certainly hope there's accountability.
And what would that look like for you, accountability?
Well, I think we need to dive deeply into everything that's gone on. Certainly, in the last 3 years in this administration, he's been impeached, and that happened for a reason. So my hope is that Congress does its job after the election and not only finds out in granular detail all of the transgressions that have been made, but also makes sure that Donald and everybody else involved in them is, punished. Justice needs to be served.
When you decided to write this book, now it's been published, you must have known that this could be it in terms of your relationship with your family. I'm curious where you see yourself fitting in, if in any way, shape, or form, in the years to come with the larger Trump family.
Well, honestly, I never really did. So, I'm okay with that, and I don't see any reason. In all fairness, I'm not sure why they would want to have anything to do with me at this point. I'm telling a truth that makes them extremely uncomfortable, and it makes them look bad, but it does happen to be the truth. So I'm pretty sure we'll all be going our separate ways.
One last thing. What do you hope people will take away from this book? I mentioned it's a bestseller. A lot of people interested here in Canada, countries around the world, Mary, about what you've written and your story and the sort of toxic nature, as you see it, of this family that you yourself were a part of. Your grandfather, your father, your uncle as well. If you could leave people with a message, what would it be?
Just please take very seriously people's characters and their psychological makeup when making the profound decision about who you want to be leading the country. These are not things that can be taken lightly at all. And my hope is that I have shone a light on why Donald is who he is and why we need to make a very serious change in America.
Mary Trump is Donald Trump's niece, the author of this book that just came out, Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man, already a bestseller. Mary, thank you for taking so much time for us here in Canada. Wonderful to have you on the show, and all the best with your book and in the days ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.